So I wanted to start our little interview by, asking you quite sort of bluntly, how did a boy from Middlesbrough end up wearing skirts?
It was an accident. Well, I've recounted the story in the book, actually. I'm not sure I want to give too much about that away, but it was just a sudden whim. I don't know where it came from, but it was irresistible, and I did it. But I mean, why it should have occurred to me rather than someone from a different kind of background, I don't know. But I came from a pretty tough working class background in Middlesbrough. I was born in '48, so I think this all started for me when I was about 11 years old. So that would have been the late 50s. And believe me, the attitudes towards this sort of thing were very different then from how they are now. And so it was a very fearful thing for me to have done. But I can't really answer. I mean, I don't know why. I mean, why should it have happened to me? There was no obvious conditioning factors that I could point to. I've often pondered, well, where did all this come from? My mother insisted once she finally found out when I was well into my 40s that it must be in the genes. And those genes must come from my father's side of the family. But, there's a lot of problems with that argument about genes. And not that I've got the brain to deal with it, but apparently there are. So what more can I say? I just don't know. Why?
So you do come from quite a working class family in Middlesbrough, don't you? So perhaps introduce your parents a little bit, but the world that you were born into and brought up into.
Well, we lived in the back streets of Middlesbrough, and Middlesbrough is a terrible place. Actually, I mean, it was just full of industry.
Marvellous now, is what you mean.
I don't wish to offend any Teessiders present, but
terrible in that, yeah.
Okay. Well, that's typical of Teessiders. You see, this is what we like. Middlesbrough had two of the largest chemical plants in the whole of Europe on either side of the town. So depending which way the wind was blowing, we'd either get all the rubbish from ICI Wilton, well, if the wind was coming off the sea, or if it was coming from the westerly direction, then we get it from ICI Billingham, and they were both huge plants. And so I remember actually after we'd moved a little way from the sort of heart of Middlesbrough, we lived in a place called Haverton Hill. And Haverton Hill was always being dumped with loads of chemicals from either of these two plants because it was high and it caught both winds. Yeah. So that, for example, I remember playing on a silver football pitch. It was supposed to be green, of course. It wasn't artificial. It was real grass. But the chemical fallout from the all the sort of what would you call it, the pollution from these two plants just deposited itself on Haverton Hill. We learned later, long after we'd left this place, that when they realised how damaging this was for the health, they closed the whole sort of community down there, and people were evacuated. So that gives you some idea of the sort of place that I lived in. But Middlesbrough itself was a heavy engineering town. There were also, in addition to the chemical plants, there were 3 or 4 major steel companies and heavy engineering companies, which is why it got bombed so badly during the Second World War, which it did. And when I grew up, I used to play on bomb sites. There were lots of them. They were really exciting places to play because, it's like they didn't have the money in the early 50s to renovate these places. They were just left as they were. And there were probably unexploded bombs down there for all we knew, but they were great fun, great places to play. Yeah. I was a bit of a sissy when I was a boy, in a certain sense still am actually, in the sense that I was probably oversensitive. I think I still am a bit oversensitive in a certain sort of way. And by that I mean...
What way exactly?
In many ways.
Oh, right.
Not noticed.
No, I'm just trying to scratch around for an example.
Okay, well...
I'll take it on trust, though. Good.
Well, in the sense that, I was very, very easily provoked to tears, which used to be very embarrassing for me as a child, as a boy growing up. My father used to get very, very frustrated because I mean, my father was a kind man actually, but he would complain at the frequency with which I would turn the waterworks on. And I didn't want to turn them on, they just seemed to have a will of their own. And my tear ducts still do. But yeah, I suppose I'm not that sensitive really, am I?
No, I'm just trying to imagine it.
Well, it's interesting, when I told Bante about my cross-dressing, he was really shocked. Well, not shocked in an ethical sense, but he looked at me and said, "But you're so masculine, Devamitra." That's not in the book, that one.
No. So, there you are, you're growing up in Middlesbrough in this, very tough environment. You tell the story of, trying on, I think, your mother's clothes.
No, it was my cousin's actually.
Oh, that's right, your cousin's clothes, that's right. And then you talk about a kind of, the next part of the story that I was following is you're plunging into theatre and acting. I wonder whether you might just say something about that aspect of the story. I know you can read more, but it'd be good to just give a bit of an outline of the journey, both. Okay.
Well, when I was 4 years old, I knew I was meant for the stage. I had absolutely no doubts about it. This is all my grandmother's fault, because she used to take me every Friday night to the Middlesbrough Empire to watch the local variety show. And my great heroes were the comedians, the stand-up comedians. And I knew one day I was going to be one of them. At least that was my initial ambition. But I was completely captivated by the whole environment of the theatre. And apparently, when I was taken to see, occasionally when I was taken to see these shows, I would actually engage the comedians in some sort of dialogue from the front of the stalls. I don't remember that, by the way, but that's what my mother told me. So that was the seed of something which changed over time. When I, at the age of 15, discovered poetry and poetry really, and literature from that point onwards. I'd done some acting. I think the first time I appeared on the stage myself must have been when I was about 5 years old. I did do some acting on and off through my childhood. I was generally reckoned to be pretty good. So by the time I was 15, one of my teachers suggested to me that I take this seriously, that maybe I should consider becoming a professional actor when I was older. And this really came to a head for me when I was 16, because I went to Nottingham Playhouse, which at that time was probably the most prestigious theatre company in the provinces. It rivaled the Royal Shakespeare Company and the National Theatre. Judi Dench, for example, was a member of the company when I was there. When I used to go there, and so the first time I went to Nottingham Playhouse, I saw a production of Sophocles' Oedipus Rex. And the actor playing Oedipus was John Neville. There's probably nobody here who's ever heard of him, but he was generally regarded to have been the finest actor of his generation. But he was an out-and-out rebel, so he never got the knighthood. But anyway, his performance moved me so much, I knew immediately, that's what I want to do. I want to be able to move people to the extent that he did. I wanted to become a great classical actor. And by the way, I never had any doubts that that's what I would become. But I didn't, of course.
So, I mean, the book, follows the story of your, involvement in acting, but also your disillusionment with it and your discovery of Buddhism. So let's just say a little bit about that, and we'll come back to skirts in a moment.
Okay. Well, yes, I did become disillusioned with it pretty quickly. I went straight from college. In fact, I went straight from college into the Nottingham Playhouse Company, and it was like my dream job. I couldn't have got a better start to my career as far as I was concerned, and I was delighted to have been offered the job. But very, very quickly I became disillusioned, partly because my great hero, John Neville, had left, and I never quite understood why he left. I mean, what I heard at the time was he got into trouble because he was having an affair with one of his actresses, and he was a married man with 6 children, and that was not acceptable to the trustees. If you read on the Wikipedia, it says that he had a disagreement with the Arts Council about money. So I don't know which of those contains the truth, or maybe there's an element of the two. But for me, that was, I think that company was never quite the same once he'd left, because he's a man of great flair. And the company that I joined just was not at that same level. It was still pretty good, but I don't know. I think what really got to me was that I was probably over-idealistic. I've been idealistic. I had a very idealistic approach to my work, and really what I discovered was that my idealism could not be matched by the reality of the theatre. And so that was something which gradually gnawed away at me. But because I'd been committed to that as a life, I mean, as a career, I didn't know what else to do. And I went through, in fact, I had a sort of existential crisis when I was about 24. And finally realised that I just could not continue. But I needed an alternative. And I didn't have an alternative, couldn't see an alternative, until I encountered Sangharakshita, the founder of Triratna. And almost from the first moment I entered what was the Friends of the Western Buddhist Order Centre, the centre, the only centre we had in those days in Archway in North London, I just felt this is where I really belong. In a way, I think that my interest in literature and even my ambition as an actor drove me there. I think it actually all helped. It was all part of the process. So I look back over my life, I can see that. It's as if it was all inevitably heading in that direction. And without that interest in literature, that great passion for literature, and my passion for the theatre, perhaps I would never have become a Buddhist. I really think there were very important factors which brought me here.
And do you think it was particularly, Bhante, by the way, is Sangharakshita, the founder of our movement. Do you think it's particularly his approach to the Dharma, particularly his, very clearly including the arts in that, was it that, or was it something more undefinable than that?
I think it was something more undefinable than that, but he was the first person I got to know in the Triratna community, by the way. So, what
did you make of him when you first met him?
I thought he was a very strange man. But then people say that about me. So I thought he was a very strange man, but he was a highly intelligent man, and I think he so obviously knew so much more than I did or anybody else I'd met. I remember a few years previously I'd met an actor called Charles Fawtry. Some of you may know who he was. He was in all the Carry On films. And we were both doing a season in Rhyl, which was horrible. He was carrying on at the end of the pier, and we were struggling, playing in the little theatre, doing ridiculous plays for a place like Rhyl, like Look Back in Anger, which attracted no audiences at all. And he took pity on us and invited us to his hotel, where he treated us to champagne. And I was absolutely astonished at this man, because he plays this real weed in the Carry On films, and I mean, he was a bit like that anyway. He's very, very camp, but at the same time incredibly learned, and up until that point he was the most intelligent man I would say I'd ever met. And I was very struck by him. And he talked a lot about his good friend Kenneth Williams, who was also in some of the Carry On films, who was also highly intelligent apparently. But this was a key meeting for me, because I highly valued his company, but on the other hand, I could not reconcile this incredible learnedness and his intelligence with what he was doing or what he'd done with his life. He got stuck in those films and he hated doing them. And so when I met Bhante, it was like someone with, it's not even a step up from that. It was like, I don't know, like a shoe. Well, yes. I mean, it was just somebody else of high intelligence, very, very learned about so many different things, and at the same time with a very, very engaging personality, as Charles Fawtry had. But Bhante did not rely upon the champagne to enter into discussion. So when I got to know him, one of the first things we talked about actually was the theatre, because he had a lifelong interest in the theatre, and he even told me that at one point he'd considered becoming an actor. Can't imagine it, but anyway.
No, indeed.
But it meant he too shared what had been my principal passion, and so it gave us a lot of common ground to get to know each other on. So obviously that helped.
Yeah. So in the book you then talk about you got very involved very quickly. It's a portrait of a really dedicated Buddhist, which I know Devamitra has been all the time I've known you. And at the same time there was this secret in your life, right from early on. Perhaps say something more about the experience of a secret.
Well, well, to have a secret is a terrible thing, to be quite honest. And I felt that I could not be honest and open about the fact that I cross-dressed. When I first got involved in Triratna, I did actually try to tell one or two of my fellow order members, because I was ordained very, very quickly. I was ordained about 18 months after I made first contact. And but they just couldn't, it seemed to me they couldn't handle it. Perhaps I was oversensitive about that, but in one instance I felt like I remember he changed the subject immediately. He just didn't want to talk about this. And I'd approached it a little bit carefully, and it was obviously more than he could handle. So I dropped it. On the second instance, all I can recall, I can't remember exactly what happened, but I do recall a sense of backing off from scorn. And that just clammed me up. And I remember feeling, I'm going to have to sort this out on my own. I'm going to have to somehow resolve this for myself. I didn't quite know what that meant. I didn't quite know what I could do about it. But that was the conclusion I came to. I think that I was very, very heavily conditioned by a northeastern working class background, where anything which in any way sort of veered from the norm where sex and gender was concerned was just an absolute no-no. And so having been brought up in such with such constricting attitudes around me, I think made me very nervous as well. And so I felt that I lacked the courage to say what I wanted to say. And so it became a terrible burden to me, because it was a significant part of my life, not that I was cross-dressing all the time, but it was an important part of what makes me up. And yet I couldn't talk about it with anybody. I couldn't find anyone to talk to about it. And I just clammed up. And what would happen over a period of time would be tensions would build, because I would have a binge, that is to say, I would cross-dress for a while. Always surreptitiously, always indoors, always in fear of being caught. And but then, the fear, if you like, of that, of being caught, would then cause me to think, I can't continue with this, I've got to stop this, I've got to give it up, I must leave it behind me. And I'd try to do that. And then, of course, the other kind of tension would build up, but it's part of me. What am I going to do about it? I can't seem to not do it. I didn't even know why I was doing it. I had no understanding whatsoever. It was a complete enigma to me. But clearly there was something in me which was impelling me to act in this kind of way. And so, yes, I led a very, very secretive life, at least with regards to that aspect of my life. And it was all the more hard to bear because in other respects, in just about any other respects, I was not secretive. I think my friends would generally describe me as being a very open sort of person. I will talk fairly freely about most things, but I just couldn't bring myself to talk about this. And so I had a secret, and a secret is a very, very terrible thing. It's a real burden. I think I've described it in there as life's most intolerable burden. I think one of the great tragedies of human life is that so many people, probably all of us, actually have secrets. There are aspects to ourselves of which perhaps we're not about which we're not entirely at ease, that we would prefer other people not to know about. And for me, that was transvestism, my cross-dressing episodes. I don't even know why I felt that way. At least I didn't at the time. I think I've got a much better understanding of that now. And I think that whilst I've tried to explain the understanding that I've come to in that book.
It's interesting because at first you sort of hoped, didn't you, that meditation and Buddhism would cure you, as it were.
That's right. Yeah, I did think, I took the Dharma a bit too literally in a certain sort of way, a bit too simplistically. Fundamentally what was going on was that I was just pushing side of myself away. And of course the whole point about practicing the Dharma is that you become a fuller, truer human being. That is to say, true to yourself in the highest sense. But there was part of me which I was pushing away. And so of course it kept kicking back until eventually I did face up to it, and I did actually start telling people, and it all came out into the open when I was about 40, I think. And I've never looked back since then, but it really constricted me. Not the transvestism in itself, but my attitude towards it. When I finally told Bhante about it, by the way, he looked at me and said, well, the problem seems to be in your own mind, and your own attitude towards this. And I think that's true, but on the other hand, I mean, my experiences initially in trying to come clean, as it were, didn't encourage me to sort of, think it might not be the sort of sickness and neurosis or whatever it was that I thought it was at the time.
In the book, you kind of exhaustively explore the different, possibilities like, repressed homosexuality, various possibilities. All sorts of things. You're working through those assumptions that there's no transvesticism, cross-dressing was some kind of sickness. When did you start to sort of feel that wasn't the answer?
I think I only really understood that wasn't the answer when I told the first person who was my girlfriend at the time, Cinda Devi, who appears in the book, because she couldn't understand why I was getting so overwrought about it. It was very easy for her, if I may say so. She wasn't in my shoes, with my particular background and conditioning.
Court shoes in that case.
That's right. What she did, or I did.
You did.
Oh, we both did. But I was just astonished by her response when I sort of told her about it. I dropped a hint early on when I first got to know her, and she wouldn't let it go, actually. I think she got me sussed. She had me sussed from the first moment, and was determined to sort me out, which she did, actually. I'm deeply, deeply grateful to her for it. But I also felt then that having told her, I had to take this further. But I was also greatly encouraged by the sympathetic response I had from her, because that made me think, well, maybe there'll be a few other people I can talk to who are not just going to respond with scorn or think I'm psychologically disturbed or something of that sort. By the way, I got these ideas into my head not because, mainly because they're out there. It was people used to regard these transvestism in this kind of way, and psychologists some psychologists have certainly considered it to be a form of mental illness in the past. So it's not just that I had some screwy ideas in my own head. Well, I did have some screwy ideas in my own head, but they didn't originate with me. I took them on board.
So there comes a point, doesn't there, in your life where you do cross-dress much more openly. You go out cross-dressed. I remember going to Pizza Land with you.
This is the embarrassing bit.
Anyway, I won't go on about it.
Please don't.
I remember travelling to Australia and New Zealand with you, and in quite a number of outfits. There was that period, wasn't there, in your life where you cross-dressed most of the time.
That's right.
We were at Mitch conveners meetings and men's Mitch conveners meetings, he was the only one showing a leg. So how did that affect you? You know, being much more open about it. For me, it was really lovely to have your openness and candour about it.
Well, first of all, I think I felt such a tremendous relief having told Sintha Devi and then gradually telling all my men friends and others that it's just like something in me relaxed deeply, and I just wanted that process of relaxation to continue. And by cross-dressing, I cross-dressed habitually for about 10 years, I think. I don't know. I think in retrospect I had to do it. In fact, some of my long-standing friends in the order by that time told me that this, you're going to have to do this, and I did because it's such a strong impulse within me. So it was a process of a relaxation which enabled me to just become or just be more fully myself. But then what happened, I suppose, was that it became less and less significant for me. It's as if whatever it meant to me was being fulfilled. And I still feel the impulse to cross-dress, but it's so much weaker than it was. I think that's partly because I've got a better understanding of its significance.
I mean, this book isn't just a confession, and from your own point of view, it also then starts to. Well, one of the things that struck me is the whole section on manhood. In fact, the subtitle is "A Quest for Manhood," and for you there was this whole question of cross-dressing at the same time exploring what manhood might mean. And can you say something about that element? This question of manhood for you in your life, and how you came to think about that.
Well, I think inevitably, being born as a boy, as a man, eventually becoming a man, it's very difficult what was very difficult for me to sort of reconcile the fact that I was a boy or a man with seemingly very unmanly habits, interests, and so forth. And I found that very, very confusing in a certain sort of way. So I had to work out, well, what kind of man am I? Am I even a man at all? I mean, I think anyone who feels the kind of impulses that dominated me for so long, well, maybe not completely dominated me, of course, but which was so strong in my makeup, is forced to ask those kinds of questions. Am I really a man? That question went through my mind many times. I just didn't know. I felt I had to be open to whatever answers came to that question. I never seriously thought of myself as anything other than a man, but I had to be open to the possibility, well, maybe I was something else. And although I wasn't quite sure what that would be. But yes, manhood became a very, very important thing for me to come to terms with as well. And I think the way I managed that was by realising in a way that, well, just because I had those impulses didn't cancel out my manhood. Why should it? Whatever manhood is. I mean, I've written quite a lot about this in the book. But I was constantly struggling with that as a question, and especially before, I was able to come to terms with my own cross-dressing. But I think Sangharakshita, the founder of Triratna, was very, very helpful in this regard, because we used to talk a lot about manhood in the early days of Triratna, and what that meant, what it meant to be a real man, for example. And I was pretty damn sure that I wasn't a real man, and I wanted to become a real man, notwithstanding my cross-dressing impulses. And I suppose I learnt to have a much fuller idea of what it means to be a man, or what it can mean to be a man, as opposed to a woman. I think for me, the working out of the cross-dressing was part of the process of discovering that for myself, if you like. And as you will be aware, I mean, I've written about the North American Buddhist tradition, where they had a sort of institutionalized transvestism, and there's a whole sort of group of men who within each tribe who were cross-dressers, to use that term. It doesn't really do justice to it. But basically, they lived in a tribal sort of, they lived in a culture which didn't in any way despise the sort of thing that I did, and somehow incorporated that. And I found that the Buddhist tradition particularly interesting because they were regarded as fundamentally men, even though in other respects they dressed in women's clothes, they performed certain tasks which were normally associated with women and so forth. So for me, I think, gradually by degrees, I just, to use that term, integrated these different aspects of myself, hopefully into some kind of unity. I am a man. I've never actually seriously doubted myself as being anything else. I did ask myself the question, am I really a man trapped? I beg your pardon, a woman trapped in a man's body. But I could never quite get there. It didn't seem to quite fit. But on the other hand, I don't identify myself absolutely as a man. I'm a man primarily. I'm not a woman, definitely not. But somehow the idea of just being a man isn't enough to sum up what I feel myself to be, or what I actually am.
That was another thing that strikes me in the book, is that there's a sense of none of the terms really quite working, transvestism, cross-dressing. Because you do talk at times about, there is this idea of being a woman trapped in a man's body, and you do talk in terms at times of feeling that your gender was sort of much more fluid, that you would, there would be a certain sort of becoming a woman in a way. And of course when I read that, and when I think about that, there's much more awareness of, like in India, for instance, there's on the passport you can be man or woman, and there's a third gender. The contemporary term now is intersex, I think. A lot, increasingly people are saying they don't, define themselves as men or women. It's quite striking reading this book now because it's become much more current in discussion, the nature of gender. I wonder what you feel about this whole question about a third gender.
I'm not sure. I've thought a lot about it actually. I'd rather not even think of that. It seems to me that, well, as you know, we've got a spectrum of, to use the terms which are most commonly used, a spectrum of masculinity through to femininity, and looking at it purely from a man's point of view, a man needs to develop feminine qualities. However you go about that. Arguably, what characterises us most is the more aggressive qualities rather than the softer, nurturing qualities. So for a balanced human personality, if you're a man, you need to incorporate those softer virtues which seem more natural, let's say, to women than to men. And I've tried to do that in the course of my life, and I think the practice of the Dharma has helped me enormously in doing that. But coming back to the question of the third gender, I just sort of feel there's a kind of whole spectrum of from masculine to feminine, and I can sort of maybe I can veer from that one to that one and back again. Why does it have to be fixed? Why does it have to be fixed even at any one time? Can't it just come and go and change? Sangharakshana is not particularly happy with these terms masculine and feminine, as you probably know. He doesn't like to use them because he thinks that they're used a bit nebulously. I think he prefers us to think more in terms of just human qualities per se, and that both men and women need to develop them. And if you're deficient in one, very obviously in one particular direction, well, maybe you need to redress the balance. And maybe that's part of the challenge, that the whole conundrum that I was faced with presented me with.
That's one of the things in the book, is that there's an instinct for you have in the book where you don't want to define and fix, even in a new category, like intersex or... that's right. I don't think we should fix anything, and I feel that even more sort of urgently in a way now.
I think one of the things that my practice of the Dharma hopefully has taught me, and especially when I did my long solitary retreat in Guhyaloka, was not to try not to fix anything. I felt, especially in that retreat, I did not want to fix myself in any way. This is going beyond male or female, it's just, or masculine and feminine. It's just, there is experience, and it's constantly shifting and changing. And to identify with it, and to fix it in some way, and to identify it as part of you or as being you, is in the end constricting and cramping.
And yeah, in our movement in Sri Ratna, we've got a strong emphasis on single-sex activities. We have a men's retreat centres, we have a men's ordination process, we have a women's retreat centre, women's, Bante's, Sangharakshita's vision, I think, is that men need to develop themselves, quite a fair amount of the time in single-sex environments. If someone's coming along to our centres, and more people are that feel actually that binary doesn't express their experience. Well, how would you how would you talk to that?
Well, of course, it would depend on the individual I was talking to. It's a very difficult question to answer in the abstract, really. I don't know what to say to that. It's the sort of thing I would need to think more about.
It's a sort of individual thing, really.
Yeah.
I know that's what Bante's been saying.
Well, I think that we just have to remember that human beings are incredibly different from one another. Everyone is unique, and we all have so many different elements to our makeup, and even they are fluid. I think the important thing is not to identify with anyone particularly strongly.
And yet, would you say that single-sex activities have helped you
enormously,
including with the cross-dressing?
Absolutely, definitely, without a doubt. I think that they help men, and I'm sure the equivalent is true for women, I think they help people to become, both men and women, to become more balanced human personalities. I'm sure I've experienced that.
So we're going to finish in a moment, but let's come back to you. Some of the audience will be disappointed that
I'm in trousers.
I felt almost obliged that I ought to wear something, a little bit more.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it's quite, one can't help feeling. There's a book written called Confessions of a Transvestite Buddhist, and here he is.
Got a ponytail.
Yeah. Doesn't seem quite deserving of that title. So, people are obviously quite disappointed that there wasn't something sparklier. So, where have you come to now in this journey of yours?
Well, I think it must have been about 10 or 12 years ago. I realised that the impulse that I felt to cross-dress had diminished to some extent. And although I still feel it, all other factors being equal, I probably would choose to cross-dress rather than not. But I've got so used again to not doing it, really. And that's because I could never quite get over an element of social embarrassment about it. And in the end, that the sort of, because it became less important to me, you're sort of weighing up that sort of slight sense of embarrassment when you're the only man in the skirt in a group of other men, especially, and especially when
some of the skirts were terrible.
This is not about fashion.
The first time I met Devamitra dressed, I said, "You're not going to wear that blouse with that skirt." We rushed upstairs. Anyway, his taste was much more shocking. Anyway,
have you finished?
Yes,
Okay. I'm supposed to be doing the talking.
Sorry, you're quite right. I'll keep quiet.
I forgot what your question was actually. What was your question?
How is it you're don't cross-dress anymore? You were talking about social embarrassment.
Yeah, well, I think there's an element of that, I mean, even some of my friends who were more than happy, well, seemingly at least, to have me cross-dressed in their presence. I always felt, well, yeah, but so far, but not completely. But there was some of the people I lived with as well really didn't like it, and obviously they felt embarrassed, and I just didn't want to really impose that upon them as much as anything. But it made me feel awkward too, and because the impulse within me had diminished to such an extent, I could take it or leave it, basically. And that's the position I'm in at the moment. Definitely my preference would be to cross-dress. Somehow that it seems to have a kind of integrating effect upon me. But I'm not that fussed about it anymore. I think that one of the... I mean, I don't think you can ever really come to any absolute conclusions about what makes someone cross-dressed. No doubt become a cross-dresser. I think it's a very complex issue, and I think it will vary enormously. But I think for me, in the end, what I sort of worked out, what it was all about, was I was ritualistically becoming a woman. And that actually has nothing whatsoever to do with women, if you see what I mean. It's more to do with the balance in my psyche. And to some extent, I hope I've managed to work that out. I hope that I have become a more balanced human being, partly as a consequence of having cross-dressed for so long when I did. I no longer feel that need to the same degree. It's not really a need anymore. It's just kind of like a nice thing to do. But on the other hand, I'm also vain. I'm getting old. I think, crikey, what would I look like? Really, it's like so. My male vanity is reasserting itself at in this 69th year.
So finally, just to finish our interview, and then we're going to have a cup of tea, and then Devamitra will read some of the passages, passages from the book. What would you say? Someone coming along just now, feel they may secretly be cross-dressing, or they may just feel, as from what research I'm aware of, that more people feel that they don't feel that they fit into gender, into that binary gender thing. Yeah. Whatever name we want to call it. I'm cautious of names myself. Yeah. And they wanted to practice the Dharma. They wanted to go for refuge to the Three Jewels, to the Buddha. They came upon our movement. What would be your advice to them? With single sex, with
Well, again, it's not an easy question to answer. But I think by and large, what I would say is don't come to conclusions too quickly about what you are or what you think you might be. Just try and work it out. I mean, you have to experience what's there. Don't push it away like I tried to for so many years. But also, don't be misled by your own experience. Give it a bit of space, a bit of breathing space. I think I would. That's one thing I would say. But I think there's another side to this, which I think is that I think it's you mentioned single sex again. I think that men generally don't find it easy being in the presence of men who cross-dress for all sorts of reasons. I think I would like to see that shift so that men were more accepting of other men like me who don't fit the mold. Because there's a lot of us. There's probably quite a few in this room, more than is obvious. A lot of us don't feel we fit the sort of mold, or what we use the binary model. I mean, I don't fit that. I don't particularly want to fit that. I don't think actually anybody does. We're all such a mix of things, both men and women. But I think men in particular, women are probably a bit more accepting than men in this regard. But I think men just, I don't know, maybe they feel threatened by a man in a dress, or something of that sort, and or hostility, even disgust. And I can see, in a way, I can also see those potential reactions in myself, actually. But I think men need to be more accepting of each other in that sort of way. Like you had in the North American Indian tribes of the Badash. I mean, they were a minority for sure, but they were somehow incorporated in a very positive way into the community as a whole.
And what about things like transitioning? Because for some people, the feeling of being trapped in the wrong body is so strong that they transition. Yeah, well, I think that anyone serious about practicing the Dharma, I would recommend really thinking long and hard about that, because I think, well, for example, to experience the pain that must be a symptom of is presumably difficult to deal with. But we know, according to Buddhist tradition, the samsara is characterized by dukkha. So that there are many forms that dukkha can take place, and in which that dukkha can manifest. And what I've experienced has been an element simply of dukkha. It's something I've had to find my own way of dealing with it. I've had to face it. I've been made to face it, and I'm very grateful that I've been made to face it. And I think it's the same if you think you feel yourself to be, I don't know, a man trapped in a woman's body, or a woman trapped in a man's body. I think in the end, the answer to that must be within the mind. That was a conclusion I came to. There's, I think I describe in the book there somewhere that I think that somehow I feel it's taking things a little bit too literally. If you have that kind of experience, I think there might be a deeper significance to it. And that's why I'm saying, well, don't come to any premature conclusions. Take your time. Because I think ultimately the resolution of the conflict, the pain that you feel as a consequence of all that, lies in the mind, not in the body and changing the body. That's my own feeling. I mean, I must say that's what I felt reading the book, is this sort of open-ended exploration of what, for at the time when you grow up, was very shameful. I mean, not, I don't mean that it is shameful, that it was felt to be a shameful thing. Yeah. And what you have in the book is a sort of exploration of that, without fixing on an answer too soon, without deciding that on a new identity. You seem to have left yourself open to discover your life in the context of practicing Dharma. So thank you very much, Devamitra. We're going to have a cup of tea, and then we're going to come back, and Devamitra will read from the book. But thank you very much indeed. And thank you.